So let me show you one way by which we could handle a payback period example. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you that I've built a structure into a spreadsheet I'm calling payback period tab. And let me go ahead and pull this up next to it so you can see what they look like side by side for a moment in here. And what you're going to notice is I took the assumptions and just linearly laid them out. So I have revenues to revenues, expenses to expenses. The expenses go from materials to labor, and then the indirect ones go from admin to depreciation to interest and tax. And after I've got those assumptions set up, then I'm going to produce an income statement and then a payback period analysis below it. Just for the sake of showing you too, let's look at some of the structural elements. I've got column A at 20, I have B through G at 15, and I have my headers and footers set up as per normal. And now I'm going to get inside of these assumptions. So again, let's put this to the side and put its front next to it so that I can look and see that my price is $1,000, and then the units that I'm going to sell are going to be 1,000 in this first year. Moving downward then, our materials as a percent of revenues are going to be 25%, and then our labor is going to be 10 employees who are making or working 37.5 hours per week for 44 weeks per year, and they make $25 per hour. And then notice I included a line for a 3% increase so I can do some calculations. Let's move this into the foreground and we'll come back to the problem later. And then our price stays constant, so I'm going to copy and paste it. I'm going to show you a fun thing here I'm going to do. I'm going to select all those values from that 1,000, and then off the home I'm going to go to editing and I'm going to do this fill series, and I saw that they went up by 100, so I'm going to step value 100 and just have it give that to me as a number that it calculated for me. This number I'm going to center and copy and paste it and put it across. All of these I'm going to center and do the same, but this one I need to be a little bit cautious because after I copy and paste my numbers of employees, and notice I keep having to fill in my right border, but my increase here, I actually wanted to start in year 2 such that my wage rate is $25 previous times 1 plus the wage rate increase amount of 3%. And then I'm going to copy and paste those across. And this time I'm going to do it just as formula so I don't lose my formatting over there. And I lost it anyway. So let's just go ahead and put it in there and we'll deal with that over here. All right, operating expenses then. Let's go back and take a peek at what these are. 10% for operating expenses. So we'll get that in there. Depreciation was $50,000. Interest was 0. And then the tax rate was 21%. And this was all on the basis of a $380,000 initial investment launch that I'm going to put over here in column B to indicate it's what kicks us off. So let's make these things into our formatted numbers, and we're going to put dollars around this one and around that one, and then we're going to center that one, and then copy these things all across so that we can have good looking assumptions. Once those assumptions are fully built out and then match this problem that has the assumptions given it to you, let's move on to the income statement. So our revenues are going to be equal to, and we're going to go find our price and multiply it by our quantity, and that will give us our revenue number. Our cost of goods are going to start with our materials being a percent of revenues. So we take that revenues and we multiply the materials as a percent of revenues. And then the labor is going to be equal to our 10 employees multiplied by who work 37.5 hours per week, multiplied by 44 weeks per year, multiplied by their wage rate that starts at $25 per hour. And then we'll drop a little line into that, and then we'll add these two things up so that we can see we had $662,000 of cost of goods. So our gross profit will be the million minus the 662, and I do have it bolded up just so that it pops out a little bit. Our operating expenses are also going to be our revenues multiplied by the admin expenses a percent. And note this is just an estimate. In the problem that you will work on, there will be much more definitive costs that you can outline a line at a time rather than just doing the simplified version of a percentage of revenues. But both of them work. Our depreciation expense is just going to be equal to 50, which then tells me that my earnings before interest and tax should be the 237 minus the 50,000 depreciation. And notice it gets mad at me in a hurry for going, hey, that formula doesn't look like the others. Well, you know what, Excel, I'm smarter than you, so let's ignore that. Okay, then down here should have said net income, and we're going to put a single line on top and a double line on bottom because our interest expense is getting us nearer to that net income number, and luckily it's a 0 for us, so that our EBIT is that EBIT minus the EBT. Drop a line. It's mad at me again for noticing that deviation in the formula, so I'm going to tell it to ignore that. And then income tax are going to be equal to, and I'm going to add an if statement in here just in the event that it's negative. So I'm going to put equals if, open a parenthesis, I'm going to look at that. If it's greater than 0, comma, then what I want is the 187 to be multiplied by the 21% tax rate. If that isn't true, if the taxable income is negative, then I want it to put a 0 because I won't pay tax on that thing. So I'll hit enter and then just show you how that works. What if I hit my EBT was negative 100? It goes, well, then you can't get taxed. So that's a neat little formula, and I'll pause and hover on that just so you can look at it again. In the net income then is going to be equals the EBT and then minus the income tax. One last time on the ignore error. And the nice thing about the way we set this up is because we did everything up top so nicely, when I copy and paste this across, it is going to naturally pick up the changes in those columns so that I can actually copy and paste this whole thing and have a nice income statement sitting there for me, where once again, even though I told it before, look, it's mad at me about that error. Do you have to do this? No, you don't necessarily have to. It just drives me bananas to see that little caution sign when I know that there shouldn't be one. But what did that give us was this notion of net income being from 148 to 312,000. It may not always be the case. You may lose money in the beginning, because what we want to really figure out is how long did it take us to pay back the initial investment. So that initial investment we documented was should be 380,000. So let's go back there and key that in properly. So that should be 380,000. And I'm going to take the decimals off that too, because again, I don't necessarily need decimals in what we work on. And then here are our cash flows in. Our cash flows in are equal to our revenues over here, and our cash flows out are equal to our cost of goods and our operating expenses and our interest expense and our income taxes. And only those ones account for our cash flows out. So then in this first year, my net cash flows are the million in minus the 801 and change out. So I actually got back $198,000 in net cash in that first year. So that to date, if I had a $380,000 investment, which I'm going to want to indicate as a negative number because that was a cash flow out, I'm going to add that to my new net cash flows and see that after 1 year, I'm actually upside down by about $181,000. Well, into the next year then, my cash flows in, again, are going to be that million, but it's $1,000,001 now due to the growth in the units. And then again, I'm going to have my expenses be equal to my cost of goods and my operating and my interest and my income tax, so that in that second year, the $1,000,001 minus the 860 gives me another 239 worth of positive cash flows in, so that my total net cash flows in the second year would be equal to that previous year plus these new cash flows here, which tells me I actually break even sitting here already in year 2. Let's copy and paste those over and just take a look at how now my cash begins to aggregate over time. Well, how might I be able to work with this spreadsheet to see how changes could affect it? Well, let's take a look at this. What if we raised our starting wage rate to $35 an hour instead, trying to attract better employees? What would that do to us? Well, it would give us a much smaller net income stream. And then look, I would lose money for the first 3 years. So my break even wouldn't occur until the fourth year if I decided to do that. So I'm going to undo that because that didn't seem to be a very sensible choice for us. Or what if, on the other hand, I was able to reduce administrative expenses down to 2% in any given year? What would that do? Well, it would allow me to, by the second year, have already $190,000. And in the first year, I've still lost money compared to the $380,000 initial investment. But what I'm trying to show you is the interconnected way in which we set up a series of assumptions. And those assumptions then help us to build a quality income statement for which we produce net income numbers and then convert those into a payback analysis where we look at the initial investment, we compare it to how we bring cash flows in and how we expend cash flows until we are able to see the point when our cash flows become positive based off of the net cash flows over time overcoming that original initial investment.